I'm Yulia, the voice of the podcast Love to Heal, a journey of self-discovery, healing, and spiritual growth.
Hello. Thank you for tuning in to today's episode of Love to Heal podcast. I titled this episode, Do You Believe in Miracles? And you will find out very shortly why I titled it that. There's a couple of reasons for it. But basically, I want to share with you what happened during my winter break. Every time I go on vacation, especially out of the country, something interesting happens. So I love sharing that with you and finding all the interesting spiritual signs, miracles included, in everything that goes on in our daily lives, but especially when we do something out of the ordinary, right? Such as travel. So for this winter break, my husband and I decided to venture out to Argentina with our 2 little kids and a teenager, and also another family, our friends, another 4 people. So we were total of 9 people, quite a big group traveling together. We started planning this well ahead, and what I have to say is that this time around, because we do travel a lot and we do plan most of our trips by ourselves, I noticed that this time around, I was not nervous at all about any part of the trip. Typically, I would worry about things like the long flight. This trip, the longest flight time was 10 hours. So typically I would think, how are the kids going to sleep on the airplane? What are they going to do for so many hours, etc.? I would worry about things like this. Also changing of planes, making sure we don't miss our next flight, finding the Airbnbs upon arrival, etc. I'm not saying I worry a lot, but I do typically worry about some of these intricacies. But this time around, like I said, I was completely calm and stress-free, despite actually tons of flight cancellations and delays of which we were notified, some of them months in advance, some of them a day in advance or the day of. And for this trip, because the country of Argentina is so big, we ended up with 8 flights, 8 different airplanes. So there was a lot of room for error. And like I said, there were delays, there were cancellations. But I just attribute this change in my attitude towards everything, my feelings I attribute this to my growing spirituality. In other words, I'm really leaving everything up to God. However it needs to be, it will be, and I'm not going to stress over it. Our rabbi always tells us that first of all, we must think positively, but also that the ultimate outcome is in God's hands. And really, there's no use in worrying. And I did talk about this prior to my starting the Jewish path of spirituality. I did talk about this in my New Age days, right? It's really all the same. Whatever you believe in, God, universe, whatever it is that takes care of things, really there's no use in worrying about things because it will be how it will be, right? So if we stay positive, if we learn to control our thoughts and subsequently our emotions, we have the power to actually change our destiny to a point. So that's what I've been doing. I've been putting everything in God's hands, not worrying about the outcome, but, doing what I can, of course, to facilitate things. So, for instance, on the Facebook group that I joined, for people who travel to Argentina, basically they share their experiences, they give tips and things like this. I read countless daily stories about flights being canceled, especially due to strikes that were going on in Argentina during the fall. And they were expecting more strikes actually to be going on during the Christmas holidays. So people would end up with no place to sleep. They would lose money on hotels and Airbnbs due to the unpredictable flight changes. right? And other changes in the domestic, and I'm talking about domestic flights here, specifically to Argentina. But I just said to myself, no matter what I'm reading here, this doesn't necessarily pertain to me. It doesn't mean that this will happen to me. And if it does, if flights do get canceled and we don't get to go to one of the destinations that we plan to go to, that's okay too. It will be how it needs to be, and there's no use in stressing about it. So that's how I handled the time leading up to our actual trip. So then comes our time to fly. We flew out from Cleveland, Ohio. First stop was Atlanta, and this was on Christmas Eve, so that we arrived in Buenos Aires on Christmas Day. And here's where the miracles begin. Miracles were actually evident from the very beginning. You see, oftentimes we think that miracles must be these grand, obvious happenings, but in reality, what we often call luck are actually the miracles. They may be small or barely noticeable, but miracles happen all the time. We just need to learn to spot them. And this is part of the mindfulness, of the conscious living that I'm learning through Judaism as well, and that I learned previously in New Age. And our rabbi told us this also. He said, God is always talking to us. It's just that we need to hear and see the signs. Okay, it's not always, probably never, written out in black and white, but we have to spot these, signs of luck, signs of, wow, I didn't expect this to happen. One of the first miracles occurred when we woke up on the airplane to Buenos Aires. We flew during the night, and when we woke up, there was a couple of hours left until landing. So we had breakfast, and then we saw flight attendants coming out with Santa hats on and huge red bags with gifts. This was completely unexpected, and what they did was they gave all the little kids toys. And for my 4 and 7-year-old, this was a true miracle. Even though we don't celebrate Christmas, doesn't matter, right? They see toys, they see somebody in a Santa outfit, they get so excited, and that literally made their day. And it made my day too, because even as an adult, I could appreciate that surprise factor on this meaningful holiday for so many, right? To wake up to gifts, because I'm sure a lot of the people who are on the airplane, they do celebrate Christmas, and for them to wake up on Christmas Day to find people in costumes and handing out gifts, that was truly special. So another person might not call that a miracle. Maybe this is not the definition of miracle for them, but to me, I'm starting to learn to see miracles in everything, because then this makes your life, your everyday life, so much more special and so much more meaningful. So that was the first really wonderful surprise on our trip. The following day, after spending some time in Buenos Aires, we flew to this northern region in Argentina called Jujuy. It's actually a province in the Andes Mountains. There we rented a car and headed to our Airbnb, which was called Cuna de Nubes, which from Spanish translates to something like a cradle in the clouds, if you will. When we originally booked it, we were told that the road to this Airbnb is quite rocky and there's gravel and rocks, and that the best way to get there is in an SUV or a larger vehicle. But car rental was so darn expensive that we decided to risk it and rent just a small sedan. So we did that, and our friends, the other family, did that as well. So we had rented 2 little sedans. Thankfully, my husband knows how to drive stick shift, as most cars are not automatic there. So we got our cars, and our car actually happened to be very old and kind of beat up to begin with, if you will. And okay, I'm talking hand-powered windows, no screen, just like a simple old school radio. There was no rear view camera, none of that. And like I said, it was already somewhat beat up. There were scratches all around, which we noted, made sure that it was all written down so that we wouldn't be charged for the damages. Because there were no other cars available. You have to also understand that this is summer. This is summer vacation for all of South America. So people travel there a lot. This is their peak season. So no other cars were available. So we said, okay, that's fine. We'll just take this car. And what we didn't know at that point, we were a little bit disappointed that we got this beat up car while our friends got this brand new Peugeot, I think it was, this European brand. But what we didn't know at the time is that this car was actually a blessing in disguise. And I'll explain why. So we drove about an hour to our Airbnb, first picking up the keys from the owner in the city. Well, actually, that's what we thought we were doing. But when we met the owner of the Airbnb in this little town, he just took our cash because we decided to pay in cash to also get a cash discount. Again, a little risky because we literally gave the cash to this man and he said, oh, the keys are in the house. They're like under a little table outside of the door. So you can imagine our surprise when the owner didn't actually give us the keys when we gave him the money. We had no receipt, no confirmation that we paid, just verbal agreement. For a moment, we stood there thinking, what if all this is a scam? But we decided to trust the guy and we went on our way. It also didn't help that the house had no physical address, believe it or not. It was literally just a spot on the map to which we had to take some unnamed dirt road that was barely visible or existent on the GPS map. So as I'm saying this, I realize how risky this whole transaction was. But hey, it turned out fine. We drive up to the mountains, thankfully using Google Maps, the offline kind, because guess what? Once you get up into the mountains, there is no service of any kind. There's no phone, there's no internet. So if you ever do venture out that far north into regions of the Andes Mountains, do know that you need to have your maps downloaded and they should be offline because otherwise you're stuck with no GPS. Finally, we arrive at this unmarked road, counting the exact number of kilometers from some bridge nearby, according to the owner's instructions. We drive a few meters and we come up on a big closed gate. There's no mention of the Airbnb, no address, just a sign that says in Spanish, free roaming animals. My first thoughts are, okay, is this safe? Is this the right place? What kind of animals are we talking about? Are we talking about llamas or bobcats? Or I had no idea. I didn't know why bobcats came to mind. I don't even know if they live in that region. But the sign also said, please close the gate after entering. So again, we didn't really have a choice. We had to keep going and hope that we were on the right road. So we opened the gate, we drove in, and immediately understood why we were recommended an SUV. To say that the road was bumpy is not to say anything at all. These were literal rocks, dirt, potholes, and huge tree roots protruding from all sides. We were going extremely slowly, but even so, the belly of the car kept scraping the ground with every little dent in the road, and the car was shaking so badly, I started to doubt whether or not we'd even make it to the house. Feeling bad for ruining this car and thinking we'd have to pay an arm and a leg for all the damage, we pressed on. I mean, we had no choice. We had to get to the Airbnb somehow. At last, we began to see farmland. and the first little house. Our house was to be the last of 3 houses on this road. So we kept on driving. We came up on another gate where these 4 dogs happily greeted us. At first, we were hesitant to step outside to open the gates. Who knows? What if these dogs would attack us or something? But my husband and my son, they came out of the car to open the gate, and the dogs surrounded them, wagging their tails and licking my son, especially my son. Later on, by the way, my son will have fallen in love with one of these dogs. Like, he felt absolutely heartbroken the day of our departure because he got so attached to one of these dogs. So, okay, the dogs started to not even follow us. They actually led the way to the next set of gates. So we went through this gate, drove past more farmland. By the way, not a person or a car in sight. It seems like nobody even lives on this farm. I don't know. It wasn't clear. During the 3 days that we stayed there, we never saw a soul. And remember, there's no reception here, no internet. So if we were to get stuck there or had an emergency, we wouldn't have been able to get any help at all. Like, we would have been stuck there. So anyway, we keep on driving. The dogs are leading the way. And at this point, we have been driving on rocks for probably 15 minutes. Finally, we see the last gate. And on this gate is written the name of our Airbnb. Hallelujah, we all think to ourselves. We all sigh a sigh of relief, and we proceed to open the gate. Again, being surrounded by these dogs. The moment we went through those gates, we realized that we had entered heaven. And I don't think I'm exaggerating here, because when I say this is the most beautiful place I have ever been, I'm not lying. And I've been to many different countries, over 30 countries all over the world. And this, I have to say, was probably the most beautiful place I have ever been. To see photos from this place, please check out my Instagram or TikTok, because a picture is worth 1,000 words, and hopefully you'll get a sense of what I'm talking about here. But yeah, the mountain range in our backyard, because this is really what it was. The house is in the mountains with the clouds sitting right on top of the peaks of the mountains. It was a perfect summer day. Sunny, ideal temperatures in the 70s. The 2,000 meters above sea level mountains surrounding us were lush green with white fluffy clouds covering their tops and never moving an inch. You know how typically when you look up at the sky, you see the clouds slowly drifting by? Well, in this place, they were completely still. It's like you were looking at a photograph of heaven. There were butterflies circling around, birds singing, fish swimming in a picturesque pond, horses and alpacas grazing, and the shepherd dogs running around. It was just heavenly. There's no other word that I can choose to describe this, honestly. And then we went inside the house. And here our jaws continued to drop, because this was the most quaint, charming, beautiful, tasteful country house we had ever seen. We wanted to take a picture of every corner, every detail, every room. It was out of this world charming. My husband and I stepped outside later on to just admire the grounds and the outdoor kitchen, which they also had. This is my husband's dream. And we told each other we could spend a lifetime here. I mean, the peace, the beauty, the tranquility of this place, once it's settled in us, we just never wanted to leave. It was absolutely amazing, breathtaking. Sadly, we only had 2 nights at that paradise, and we had so much to see and do that we could only enjoy this property really just a tiny bit in the morning, and then once we got back before bed. That same day, despite the rocky road experience, we drove out to a neighboring town of Purmamarca to see the famous Hill of Seven Colors. The mountains in this region, in this province of Jujuy, are actually very different from any other mountains that I've seen because they're very colorful. Had we traveled even farther north to another town, we would have seen the hill of 14 colors. And when I say different colors, I mean different colors. Like you look at the mountain range and you see everything from blues, greens to yellows and reds. It's like a rainbow. So we went to see the Hill of the Seven Colors. We settled for that because the other one was a little bit too far of a drive. But when you arrive in this city, in this town, Purmamarca, and you see the huge sign with the name of the province, under it, it also says Energía Viva. In translation, it means live energy. And in this place, there must be some kind of energy vortexes too. There wasn't really any mention of that, but having been to the vortexes in Arizona, I'm able to now kind of spot where other vortexes might be from what our tour guide explained. And I saw quite a few places in this town where the trees were all twisted, like the trunk of the tree and the roots of the tree. And this is a clear sign of an energy vortex. So there's definitely powerful energy in that region. If you haven't listened to my episode about energy vortices in Arizona, check it out in the previous seasons. It's really interesting. So the following day, we went to explore several areas, first attempting to reach a waterfall in the mountains by car. My husband found this on Google, and it looked like a cool waterfall that we wanted to, drive up to because the hike seemed a little bit too strenuous for our little ones, so we thought we would drive up to it. And this was a terrifying experience for me personally, and one that made me realize that I'm still not trusting God 100% yet. Nobody's perfect. I have become very spiritual. I do believe in God so much, but I still, of course, have room to grow. Who doesn't? I mean, we are here on earth to really learn, and to grow until our final days. So for me, I know that I need to keep working on this because fear is a clear sign that I don't fully trust God. I'm not a huge fan of heights to begin with, okay, but I can deal with it. When it comes to heights, plus a narrow, one-way dirt road, basically over a cliff, like you look out the window of the car and you see a drop of I don't know how many kilometers, that's when I get more scared. So here we are in our old little raggedy car, climbing steep, rocky hills on stick shift, occasionally rolling back, stalling, and trying to climb up and up with a 1,000-meter drop, like I said, on one side of the car. I really start to, I don't know if I want to call it panic, but I really get nervous. And I tell my husband, you know what? Let's go back. I'm not feeling it. It would be wise for us to turn around while we still can. But my husband calls me a chicken and he keeps going. So we climb a little further. I tell him we're going to, first of all, destroy this car because of all the rocks going uphill. And this is super dangerous, especially when I see another car coming down the same road. And remember, this is a one-way road. So I tell my husband, if we go any further up, we won't have room to let each other pass. And I really don't feel like going in reverse down a winding cliff. So thankfully, at this point, my husband agrees. We back down a little to a point where we can turn around and let the other guy pass. Just out of curiosity, we asked him about the waterfall. And he replies that Google Maps must be off because he didn't find any waterfall at all. So at this point, I tell my husband, see, I told you. I was so glad we didn't carry through with that plan, and we saved so much time and my sanity. Because the climb in the mountains, I later found out, is called the Devil's Throat for apparent reasons. So I was so glad, and I really felt that at this point, I trusted my intuition. Yes, I was scared. Yes, I was nervous, but also I paid attention to my intuition. I felt that we didn't need to go up there. And I was right, because maybe the waterfall dried up, or maybe Google Maps was really off. I don't know, because we were using offline maps. So that ended well, and we got back down safely. After this crazy adventure, we decided to explore the highest point in the Andean Mountains. And we took pictures at the monument that says you are at 4,170 meters above sea level. Not gonna lie, it was difficult to breathe there, but it was strikingly beautiful. And you could feel that you are really on top of the world. It took us an hour of winding roads with very sharp turns to reach this point. But the good thing about this road, and why I was totally up for this experience, was because it was a beautifully paved two-way road, two-lane road. So there was no fear of us, falling off the cliff or something and sharing the road with other crazy drivers. So from there, we continued our adventure in search of the salt flats. Google Maps was not precise in this instance either, but it actually worked in our favor. And again, I have to recognize this next story as a little miracle as well. And here's why. We're driving through the desert. At this point, we're literally in a desert. There's cacti everywhere, not a soul around, just some cars zooming by, mostly trucks actually, and no signs for these salt flats that we're looking for. The GPS says to turn on some dirt road that doesn't even look like a road, no name, no markings, nothing. Okay, so we drive, and eventually on this dirt road, we see a tire, just like an old truck tire, and on that tire, we see a white arrow. So we think, okay, this has got to be the sign for it. Really odd for a tourist attraction, but okay. We drive some more until we come up on what looks like a plant, like an industrial plant. At this point, we can clearly see the salt flats, but still quite a ways away. You can see the white flat lands spanning many miles, but we can't figure out how to get to them. There are huge gates at this plant that prohibit the passing of anyone unauthorized. But next to the gate is another dirt road, which doesn't have any do not enter signs, which to us means we're welcome. Well, this is how my husband really operates. And even if it did say do not enter, my husband probably would have entered anyway. But I feel like this is the Russians in us. We decide that even though there's nobody around, nobody to ask, we're not sure where this road leads us to, we'll just go and check it out. Since there was not anybody around, we drove right past the plant, and guess what? We did come to the salt flats. The landscape was truly striking. You can just imagine endless snow-white salt flats contrasting with the vibrant blue skies and the Andes Mountains visible in the distance. It was very memorable. We got out of the car, we walked around, even licked the salt to make sure it was salty. We took many, many pictures, and then we drove on to another part of the flats. There we found dozens of pools, these like long rectangular pools cut into the salty ground, and the water in them was an unreal shade of blue. And we figured this is where the salts get cleaned to undergo further processing. As we drove on, we realized that we are definitely trespassing, as the signs now were very clear. They were made for the plant workers. But since no one was around, we were lucky enough to experience this wonder of the world in complete privacy and peace, and of course, take some amazing photos. Again, check those photos out on Instagram or TikTok. When we left there and we drove a little further down the major road, we actually saw the official entrance to this place, and it was complete with tour guides and everything. However, we felt super lucky to have experienced this beauty on our own without the crowds and seeing and walking on the widest salt flats possible, because the area where all the tourists were was not white at all. From all the foot traffic, I guess, it looked brownish and really nothing special. Again, to me, this was a type of luck that to me translates into a little miracle. It's a sort of everyday miracle. It's nothing grand, but it does feel really special to have experienced this place in the way that we did. After this, it was time to go home, and we had another 2 hours of winding roads to get to our Airbnb. That night, it was already dark when we got to the house. We saw some wildlife, which now I know was nothing to be scared of. It was just vicuñas, which are animals that are similar to llamas and alpacas, and there were some skunks and rabbits running around. So I guess that was the wildlife that they were talking about on the gate, and nothing to be worried about. We spent our second and last night at this beautiful Airbnb, and we headed out the next morning. We drove to another city called Salta, which is a bigger city with huge central plazas and all the Spanish influence visible in the colonial architecture. We spent a couple hours there wandering the streets, entering little shops, and eating ice cream. We went inside 2 cathedrals that were very beautiful inside and out, and the importance of faith, namely Catholicism, was very evident in this city. We witnessed a baptism. We observed many people in prayer. It was interesting and lovely to see the love for God all throughout the northern province. And also, I have to mention, when we were high in the mountains, I saw many graffiti signs saying things like, "We thank God for everything," or "God is love." Some of these were actually written in stones. I think they were huge rocks or stones on the side of mountains. So you could see it from far away, just driving by on the highway. I also saw many tiny, what looked like altars or like tiny houses. They were very colorful, and they were often spotted along the roads. And they would have crosses on top and candles and I think offerings inside. To be honest, I was a little bit surprised to see so much Catholicism so high up in the mountains. For some reason, I thought that the indigenous people that reside in the Andes had kept their traditions and beliefs, because you can certainly see it in their dress and way of life. They really did keep up with their traditional clothing and their traditional way of life, but they really do also consider themselves Catholic, and you can see signs of Catholicism, like I said, all throughout the Andean region. What was especially dear to the heart about all those signs and expressions of faith is that those people have so little, so few of the modern amenities, so little money and resources, and yet they are extremely thankful for everything God provides, especially water. That was a recurring theme in the graffiti that I saw, that water is the best gift from God and that it should be cherished. There were also many signs saying no to lithium, as well as many reminders to care for nature and the environment. When you see poverty, it really puts things in perspective. I want my kids to understand that what they have at home is a privilege. I want them to count their blessings, to not take things for granted. We were sitting at a little park in one of the towns in Jujuy, having tea and ice cream, and there was the playground and many local kids running around. Immediately, a bunch of boys ran up to my son and my friend's son as well and asked them to play. It was so sweet. It was so innocent. I truly miss this innocence in myself. When you see through the eyes of a child, when all you see is fun and love, you don't see difference in skin color or language or origin. You just want to have fun with another human being. This understanding of oneness, that we are all made of the same, the spark of God is in each of us, this realization is one of the biggest steps a person can take on the path of spirituality, I feel like. We are all made in the image of God, which means we must love one another. Because if you despise even one person, you despise God. And that is the worst possible offense that a human being can commit, and one that typically ends tragically, if not for the person who hates, then for his descendants. I don't want to get off topic here, plus I already have an episode on the topic of oneness in previous seasons, so I will continue with my story. And the story continues as we arrive at the airport to return our cars, our rented cars. And we know that they're beat up. We understand that. So at this point, we're just hoping for the best. The lady from the car rental walks around our car. She closely looks at everything, inside and out. She calls someone else to help her. She writes something down, and we're close by. We're standing right there. We're thinking, oh my goodness, they're going to charge us an arm and a leg for all the scratches and tire wear. But to our pleasant surprise, she comes up to us and says, literally, perfect. And she shows us a thumbs up sign. We were floored, to say the least. If you don't think that's a miracle, then I don't know what is. I mean, I cannot even begin to tell you what our car looked like after 3 days of riding on rocks. I cannot tell you. And for this woman to walk around and inspect every inch of this car and to tell me that it was in perfect condition, that, my friends, is a true miracle. And here's something else. Our friends who got the brand new nice sedan, their new rental did show significant car damage, and they were forced to pay 170,000 Argentinian pesos, about 150 US dollars, to cover the cost of a new tire. So there you go. Thankfully, our friends are very optimistic people, and this didn't ruin their day, but it was very unfortunate, especially that after returning the cars, our flight was also delayed by 3 hours. Our next stop on this Argentinian adventure was the end of the world, literally. So we got through the delay. 3 hours is better than a canceled flight. We were tired, but we flew to Ushuaia. This is the most southern populated city in the world, and is also the point of departure for those continuing on to Antarctica. We arrived in the evening. The sun was shining due to the extra long days, because remember, this is summer for South America. And we landed on this narrow piece of land surrounded by water. And there were mountains also all around. These mountain peaks were actually covered in snow. It was beautiful, jaw-dropping. We found Ushuaia to be a very charming small town with friendly people and unforgettable nature and landscapes. We were happy to find a big menorah, by the way, for Hanukkah, because this year Hanukkah coincided with Christmas. It started on December 25th and ended on January 2nd. So we were there for all days of Hanukkah, and I actually took a menorah with us and candles, and we did light candles every single night of Hanukkah. But it was really cool to see a huge menorah, a huge Hanukkah in the city center of Ushuaia. First few nights of lighting the candles, we did great. I was really proud of myself for arranging all this for the very first time ever. But then came night 7, and I don't know what got over me, but for some odd reason, I prepared the 8th night candles. I counted them, I prepared them, like I set them out. We lit the candles for the 7th night, and then the candles of the 8th night, I put onto the metal menorah, like on top of the menorah. And I just left them there. I forgot about them. The candles take about half hour to burn. So in about half hour, my husband calls me over and he tells me what the heck happened to our menorah and to our candles. As you can imagine, the candles that were sitting on top of the metal menorah had completely melted, creating a huge mess on top of this wooden bar, I guess. Yeah, in this Airbnb that we stayed at, there was this wooden polished bar in the kitchen, and that's where I set the menorah. And so what happened was, besides all the melted wax running all over this bar, the metal part of the menorah somehow burned through and burned a spot in this wooden bar. Of course, I was very bummed about the candles and the burned menorah, but also now I was thinking that we're probably going to get charged for the damage to this wooden bar. I tried everything to try to clean it up as much as I could, but again, I kind of just left it up to God. If we needed to be charged for this damage, then we needed to be. Fortunately, luckily, or as I said before, it's a miracle, that the Airbnb was sort of in a rough shape, I guess you could say. The house was fine. It's just that it wasn't the most beautiful or well-kept place. This was the only house available for our group of 9 people in Ushuaia. So we kind of didn't have a choice. We rented this one, even though it cost a fortune, probably, like I said, due to the peak season. But yeah, we didn't really have a choice. So we ended up with this shabby house. But again, it worked out in our favor because I think due to the rough shape, either the owner didn't notice that damage from the candles or felt like we already paid a good amount of money, a good sum, and didn't have the heart to charge us more for it. Whatever it is, I'm thankful we were not charged for that damage. So once again, in my book, that is a small modern miracle. By the way, my husband also broke a glass in this Airbnb. And here, I really wanted to be honest about it. And when I asked the host how much we owe for the glass, he also said not to worry about it. Whereas in our previous Airbnb in the mountains, our friend broke a glass and was immediately asked to pay for it upon checkout. It's of course a matter of a few bucks, but I count all my blessings, no matter the size or significance. Anyway, after touring the city by foot, a double-decker bus, and also train, we headed out on a catamaran tour on the Beagle Channel. The idea was to see penguins, or so we thought. My friend and I were convinced that we had purchased a tour to see the penguins. But once we got on the boat, we realized that it was actually a trip to see sea lions. I didn't think it was a big deal, but to my friend it was. She was very disappointed and a little bit angry. She tried to find very quickly another way, get off the boat and maybe get on a different one to try to, see the penguins that she really wanted her kids to see. But we weren't able to find another option. We were already on the catamaran and we were about to take off. So, we stayed, of course, and continued with that tour. It's interesting. My friend and I, we talked a lot on this trip about my philosophy of going with the flow. And I've learned, for the most part, not to resist when things don't go as planned, but also to accept them because everything happens for a reason. My friend, on the other hand, she doesn't completely agree with this philosophy. She's the type of person that goes above and beyond to get what she wants, and she stops at no obstacles. I told her that for me, when something doesn't come easy, let's say I tried it once, I tried it twice, maybe even 3 times, then to me, that's a sign that this is not for me. I believe in signs like this. And more, I'm believing in these signs, especially now that I'm learning to spot and decipher them better. But it was a very interesting discussion that we had with my friend because we are so different in that sense. She thinks that if you don't fight for what you want, then you're not going to live the life that you want. You're just going to give up easily on everything. She says, in that case, you can just stay on your couch and not even leave the house. But I look at it differently. I think that you should try to do what you want and you should, give several attempts and try to figure things out and yes, fight for what you want. But if you're constantly being bombarded with signs, again, this is for me, right? This is how I look at it, that something is not coming easily to you. To me, that is a sign that maybe you should look elsewhere. So to me, when I found out that we're not going to see the penguins, but rather sea lions, it was easy to go with the flow. Who cares? I can look at penguins elsewhere, or I'll come back another time, or whatever it is. To me, it was not a big deal. So this is something that I've learned along the way, to just go with the flow, because it's really not worth your worry and stress. So after spending the new year in Ushuaia, we headed back to Buenos Aires, the capital of Argentina. We had a lot planned for the few remaining days, and everything was already booked except for the ferry to Uruguay. Our friends that had traveled to Argentina and Uruguay a few years ago, they recommended to us that we take a day trip to this nearby Colonia de Sacramento, a little city in Uruguay. And for some reason, we assumed, I don't know why we assumed, that the ferry would be similar to what we have in our city on Lake Erie. And here, all you do is you walk up to the ticket office, you get a ticket, and you get on the ferry. Super easy. Well, it turned out to be a completely different story, and one that caused us, well, mostly our friends, a lot of lost sleep and much stress. Since it is peak season, like I said, in South America, it's their summer vacation, most ferry times were either sold out or the remaining first-class tickets cost just unimaginable money, which we were not willing to pay. On the occasion that we did find available times online, the website kept crashing. And after literally hours and hours of trying to purchase tickets online, I, again, had decided for myself that this was not meant to be. And I personally would have been fine with it, not going to Uruguay. It wouldn't have been the end of the world. My friend, on the other hand, was not going to let her plans be changed so easily. She persisted by calling the ferry company, and after 3 times of starting the buying process and being disconnected mid-sentence, she finally got what she wanted. So, on the one hand, I was happy and thankful to my friend for not giving up, but on the other, I was a bit concerned because I believe that all those failed attempts were signs. And by the way, the day before our planned trip to Uruguay, my stepdaughter got some kind of stomach bug. So during the night when we were up, we couldn't sleep because, she was running to the bathroom back and forth. I thought, okay, this is another sign that we shouldn't be going. We probably need to stay home and take care of her. The day of the trip, our ferry was to leave at around noon. My husband just needed to make a decision. We were not sure up until the very last moment. Do we stay and take care of our stepdaughter? Do we lose the money that we paid for the tickets? And it was still a lot of money. It was very expensive. Or do we just, risk it also and go? And, the risk being here that, who knows, maybe the signs were telling us not to go and something bad will happen there. And then our daughter's not feeling well. Do we take her? What do we do? So we finally decided that we will go. And I just kept repeating to myself, like I always do, that whatever happens, happens. It's God's will, and, our destiny is in God's hands, and not to worry about the outcome. Of course, deep down, I really didn't want to miss out on the opportunity to travel to Uruguay. I mean, of course, I'm a lover of travel, and any chance I can get to see a new place, a new country, of course I want to go. So after, like I said, going back and forth, we decided to go, and we get on the ferry. We go through the extensive check-in, passport control, metal detectors, everything you see at an airport and more, which we didn't even really expect all that. So we get on the ferry, and I have to admit, I had never been on a ferry like this. It was humongous. It fits over 1,000 people. It has several stores and cafes inside of it in the middle section of this 2-story ferry, and then also they take hundreds of cars in the level below. It was a really neat experience. It was a 1-hour ride. It was smooth and fun, and we made it to the city of Colonia. We took a short walking tour, and then we had a few hours to wander the streets and explore the town. We all fell in love with the town. It was really charming, historical, the cobble streets, the flowering trees, the water views. It was really, really beautiful, and we did not want to leave. Of course, I was really happy that we had gone. We ended up renting golf carts too, and we took the kids to a local beach. It was a wonderful day trip. If we had known it would have been so nice, we definitely would have spent the night. Our ferry was the last ferry scheduled for that date at 8:45 p.m., and we were told to be back at the port around 7 p.m. So we rushed back from the beach, turned in our rental golf cart, and we got through security wonderfully. Actually, it's really nice having small kids because you get priority everywhere. You can cut all the lines. So that was really convenient. We were so happy we were the second in line to board the ferry. And we were excited also because our tickets back were business class because the other cheaper classes were already sold out. So we had to get business class, and we couldn't wait to relax on board after this long day of walking and being in the sun. But there's always a but. To our surprise, announcements started to come in about delays. We wondered how it's possible for a ferry to be delayed. It's literally one ferry going back and forth. And soon we found out that the boat broke down and that there might not be a ferry at all that day. So we started thinking, what do we do? Do we get a hotel in Uruguay? Do we sleep on the floor of this port? Like, what do we do? People started to panic. We're talking about over 1,000 people in this small port panicking. Okay, just picture that. At this point, it's about 9 p.m. We have been standing in line for close to 2 hours. Our little kids are falling asleep, one in the stroller, the other one on the floor. The line to the only snack bar is endless. It's hot and humid inside this port. And like I said, 1,000 people are getting angry. Crowds start to form around ferry representatives. We hear shouting, kids crying, elderly people complaining, and no answers as to our fate that evening. Around 10 p.m., we get word that a smaller boat will be able to transport the first 600 people, namely families with young children, disabled, and elderly people. Okay, now we have some hope, but there's still so much time to wait, and food and drinks are slowly ending in the snack bar because I don't think they planned for such a big crowd to be at the port for so long. Thankfully, my husband is able to buy us some water and some snacks to get us through the long night ahead. Around 11, announcements are made that those people with a car need to go to a hotel or start driving to Buenos Aires, which is about 5 hours away by car. People are super mad. They demand reimbursements. They scream at each other, especially at the workers. We see like this National Guard or something come in to try to control the situation, police and everything. Before, when we were all lining up to get onto the ferry, we had clear lines. We had priority boarding. We had, like the different zones. By this point, there's no trace of any lines left. It's all just one big group of people trying to get onto that first ferry. And of course, no one cares about who the kids are and the elderly. Everybody's trying to push through to the front of the line. And this is where, I'm not going to lie, it got a little scary. I felt like I was a part of a cattle herd. Dozens of sweaty bodies leaning on me, pushing me. It was complete chaos. I thought at that moment how much we resemble animals and how in situations like this, it doesn't matter if you have a business class ticket, if you're rich, you're poor, if you're healthy, if you're ill. We're literally all in the same boat, awaiting our fate, controlled by someone else. I saw people videoing this mess. Probably they showed it later on the news, or maybe you can find it on TikTok or something. I heard people scream that this is an embarrassment, the lack of order, the behavior of people, police and guards. Everybody was trying to control this crowd, just pushing and pushing. Somehow, I don't know how, we pushed through, probably for a good 10 minutes, trying to make our way to the entrance of the ferry, with literally no room to breathe, elbowing our way through. At one point, I got separated from my husband, my son, and my stepdaughter. I was pushing the stroller with my sleeping daughter, and little by little, people stepped aside to let me pass, thankfully. When I finally got to the front, my son ran to me crying. He thought we had been separated for good. I think the experience completely traumatized him. Of course, it was really late. He was really tired, and he got really scared when he lost me. So now the question is, was this what the signs were warning me about? If so, then, well, I'm still glad I went. And should I ignore the signs next time? This to me still remains unclear. When do I trust my intuition and when do I say, no, I'm exaggerating, it's all in my head, and I should be like my friend and get what I want. I like to think that what I call signs, not being able to purchase the ferry tickets, for example, to me were definitely warnings that if I do go through with my plan, there could be problems. But then it's up to me if I want to take the risk. Again, we got lucky because we did have young kids with us and we did get to board first. But it could have been a very different outcome, right? We could have had to spend the night in Uruguay. We could have had to try to get a hotel at 11 at night. We could have been stuck at this port the whole night and sleeping on the floor. It could have been a very different outcome. And thankfully, we had an extra day before our return to the United States from Buenos Aires. But there were people in line that were screaming that we have to get on this ferry because we have a flight to catch tomorrow. So, of course, I'm very glad that everything ended this way. And like I said, we got lucky. But I am really wondering, should I pay more attention to these signs or should I just brush them off? I'm curious what you think. Let me know. You can text me, you can message me on Instagram, you can email me. All the information I will leave in the description of the episode. Getting back to what happened afterwards, I do want to mention that once we did get on the ferry and we did get into our business class that we had purchased, it was pretty awesome. We were greeted with champagne glasses and we slept in these huge leather reclining chairs. It was really great. Yes, we got home. By the time we got to our Airbnb, with, getting from the ferry to the Airbnb and everything, it was about 3 a.m. But we were all alive and doing well, so that was the most important part. All in all, looking back at this trip, this was a really great trip. It made me happy to see the presence of Judaism in Argentina, especially in Buenos Aires, where there's a huge Jewish community with many synagogues, many Jewish schools, not to mention hundreds and hundreds of kosher restaurants. It was wonderful to see several gigantic menorahs in different parts of Buenos Aires for Hanukkah. So that was really special for me. And as I mentioned in the beginning, this was the least stressful trip of all, I think, because I did go with the flow more than ever. Something else that I've learned recently and shared with our friends and even my teenage stepdaughter is the concept of you win some, you lose some, right? How every time we try to save money or time by tricking the system, for instance, we pay for it later elsewhere, and it all evens out. For example, my husband likes to say that our kids are younger than they really are, so that we can save money on tickets to parks and shows and things like that. But every single time we do that, we end up paying what we saved, in quotations, by running into unexpected fees, charges, my accidental taking the phone off airplane mode. Also, we only plan to use my husband's phone for the 2 weeks there because it costs $12 a day, which is not very cheap. And honestly, we only needed one phone because we were always together. But there were 2 times that, one time I had to take my phone off airplane mode. Different story, won't go into it. Had to do with Airbnb check-in. The second time, just, I don't know how, by itself in my pocket, it decided to take itself off airplane mode. So, there goes the $24 that maybe we saved on tickets somewhere that I had to pay to Verizon, right? So it all completely evens out. And again, with our friends, it's interesting too. They try to save on their Airbnb by saying that they only had one kid staying with them. I think they saved around $100 and something. Well, they paid that sum. Remember I told you about the damage on the rental car, on the tire? So there went their $150 that they tried to save on the Airbnb by lying about who is staying at the Airbnb. So again, it all evens out. Wherever we try to cut corners or take shortcuts, eventually we pay it all back. So in my opinion, I don't think there's any use in trying to trick anybody, trick the system or anything, because, I mean, who are we trying to trick here? If we're talking about God, obviously there's no use to it because God is everywhere. God is everything. So, yeah, God knows. So thank you so much for listening to this episode. I hope you had some fun listening to my adventures. I will leave you with a quote today by Yvette Miller, a professor and trade analyst for the U.S. government. She lectures internationally on Jewish topics, and I think her quote, really goes well with what I talked about today in my podcast. And she says, "It's not only the out-of-the-ordinary things that are miraculous. Everything about us, the very existence of the world itself, is an awesome miracle that should inspire us to think and praise the Creator."